Well, in this lesson, we're going to compare the differences between a rational number and an irrational number. First of all, we're going to look at the word rational, and notice in here there's this word ratio, and a ratio simply means a fraction. And so we're going to look at rational numbers or fractions. And so when we think about fractions, we know a fraction can be like a half or a third. It could also be like 4 over 4, which is the same thing as 1. We could have, let's say, 9 over 3, which equals 3. We could also have, let's say, 3 and 1/4, which we know is a mixed number, and you can rewrite that as 13 over 4. And so all these numbers are fractions or also rational numbers. We also know that fractions can be written as a decimal. And so 1/3 can be 0.3. And we know with 1/3 that it's the decimal repeats 0.3333 on forever. And so we know that if a fraction has a decimal equivalent that repeats, that it's going to be a rational number. And so 4 over 4 is 1, 3. We have 3 and 1/4 over here. It's 13 over 4. We could write this as a decimal as 3.25. And so we know with a fraction will have a decimal. If the decimal repeats itself, we know it's a rational number. The decimal just ends, we know it's a rational number. So in terms of what is truly a rational number, a rational number is simply a fraction. An irrational number, on the other hand, is a number whose decimal never ends. It never repeats. Perhaps the most famous irrational number is pi, and we know that pi is a ratio of the diameter of a circle compared to its circumference. And so pi is an irrational number. Another irrational number is when you take the square root of a number that isn't a perfect square. So for instance, the square root of 7 has this as an answer, 2.6457, and the decimal just continues on and on and on and never repeats, much like pi never repeats. And so these numbers are irrational. And so when you break down the word irrational, ir meaning not, and ratio right here, what this means is that this is not a fraction. And we know from our previous work that not a fraction means that the decimal is never ever going to repeat like this. Where over here on this side with 0.3, we know that the 3 keeps on repeating. In a later lesson, we're going to need to show you how you can actually convert a decimal that's repeating into its fraction. So in summary, when we think about a rational number is a fraction with a repeating decimal. And so an irrational number is not a fraction, which means that it has non-repeating decimals as a property of its number. And so with this explanation, this is Yo-Yo Juice Sticks comparing rational numbers versus irrational.